You're looking at a fine and very old example of a really cool Southwestern American artistic tradition. These are santos and santeros, saints and the people who make representations of them. However, here it's the figure of Christ, as rendered in about 1830, so how about that? Right in the middle of this 400-year tradition. New Mexico is the home for it, as you can see here on this book cover, and that's where our piece was made. That tradition is still thriving there. I saw it when I was in New Mexico, the one time I've been there, in Santa Fe, and we bought a piece, an inexpensive modern one, but it was made by someone who had been doing it as a family tradition, right? So the craft gets passed down. Not the one on screen, by the way. It's not what I'm talking about. This one here is a retablo. If it's two-dimensional, it's a retablo. If it's three-dimensional, it's a bulto. In carving saints like this, santos, this is all part of a greater practice in the Spanish-speaking world. You know, saints being a big deal in Catholicism. And this was a big teaching aid, too, because the kinds of figures here in the American Southwest would be used at churches, at missions, you know, that kind of place. And as Christianity was, well, you know, forced upon the indigenous inhabitants, it does seem throughout the Western Hemisphere that saints were something that was seized upon by Native Americans, those who were converted, because it has more of that pantheistic feel, right? And then obviously there's the Santeria type tradition from the Caribbean. But this is unrelated. These are not stand-ins for, you know, local indigenous gods. Let's get back to our specimen then. I was really happy to see one of these in person. It's not small either. It's hard to tell from the pictures, of course. It's 2 feet tip to tip. And it's made out of simple materials, as you can imagine, given the time and place, right? Early 1800s, basically in the frontier. So it's wood, paint, and animal hide. And the colors are obviously kept pretty simple, and the whole thing is really striking. The red is, I think, the most notable feature, right? The red of the blood. And the way it drips down. We're told that this item in particular was from a small mountain village, so I'm sure it hung on a very small church or home wall for a long, long time. That's why it's so well preserved. A high-altitude desert, luckily, also turns out to be a great place for the preservation, kind of the accidental preservation of an antique, right? Dry air, much better than the opposite for this kind of a thing, right? Keeps the wood from rotting or rotting as quickly. Also, the area is just gorgeous landscape-wise. It's where Georgia O'Keeffe went to for inspiration, of course. We drove out to the village she lived in when we were there. Getting real up close now. Here's kind of the finest detail on this piece, right? Luckily that thing is held on. You can see the stress fractures. What you can notice here too is that basically the color combination is white, black, and red. And funny enough, I've always been fascinated by that. It's a mythologically potent and important color combo. Once you're aware of that, you'll see it in all kinds of old myths, folk tales, art. Anyway, something else of note is that during the 60s and 70s, this tradition here in New Mexico and the surrounding area was dying out. You could see why with the generation gap and the rejection of what came before, the ties to colonialism. Thankfully, though, it survived. There's santeros working today and passing the tradition on. That's a fortunate thing, and it's also fortunate that we get to see this one here. New Mexico, small mountain village Cristo, part of the Santero tradition, circa 1830.